Okay, I just wanted to sort of wrap up the course and add a few comments about collapse of ancient civilizations. I enjoyed seeing all your presentations. Um, you guys did a good job in a couple of cases. I would like to emphasize a few of the um, uh, explanations for ancient collapse and talk about collapse in general to help you prepare a little bit for the final quiz. And the final quiz is going to cover the ancient civilization of China and also secondary states. So that includes Nubia, it includes West Africa, East Africa, South Africa. That means Great Zimbabwe. It also includes the Minoans and the Mycenaeans and the material that we discussed in terms of collapse. Okay, well, you saw that a collapse is different from a decline because a collapse is very sudden, very dramatic. It takes place over a short period of time. A decline could happen over, let's say, a century. A collapse doesn't necessarily mean the end of a society, as you saw. Many of these societies rebound, not all of them, or they can reemerge in a different form. While you were researching your civilizations, you probably noticed that many different explanations were proposed to explain the collapse of a specific civilization. And some theories have been sort of argued against, but are still accepted by some. Some are completely discounted. In terms of putting these explanations together, sometimes scholars think it was one main cause with a lot of sort of smaller things making the situation worse. Sometimes people believe it was multiple things happening all at once. And also sometimes people think it could have been one or two main causes that then had ripple effects, right? So ruined agriculture from drought, causing starvation, which causes social upheaval. Right? So the social upheaval may not be a prime cause of the collapse, but it was sort of an after effect of the main cause, which was drought. Something along those lines. I think you saw that this is a fairly complicated topic in many respects, but I think it's one that's important, as you saw when you were thinking about the contemporary world and problems today. We can certainly learn something from these ancient civilizations. Collapse usually takes place in the form of abandoned cities, stopping the building of monuments, and essentially what is collapsing is sometimes the population, but specifically the hierarchy and the leadership that's holding things together. So with the Maya collapse, after the Maya collapse, what archaeologists see is that in the major cities like Tikal and Copan, the centers dropped in terms of population, and in the temples, squatters lived. People basically lived in temples. They were no longer being used as temples anymore. And so that really, to me, visually, this picture of people squatting in the temple really says collapse in a lot of ways. It would be like, imagine downtown Grand Rapids after a collapse, where people are camping out in the courthouse. Right? No court cases going on there anymore. Now it's just being used as shelter for people. That would be a good sort of indicator of a collapse. Okay, I want to talk about some patterns that you might have noticed. One of the interesting patterns, I think, concerns secondary states, right? So we talked about several secondary states, and we also had a presentation on some secondary states. So Nubia is a secondary state. The civilizations of West Africa, like Timbuktu, secondary states. East Africa, Great Zimbabwe in South Africa, the Mycenaeans, the Minoans. Aksum is also a secondary state. Many of these states rise with trade. Because of external trade, they become powerful, and that's how they become states. With many of these societies, if trade disappears or ends or declines, those civilizations can then face an economic downturn and possibly a collapse. So I almost think of it as live by the sword, die by the sword. You grow wealthy from trade, but what happens when that trade actually dies out? So this was an explanation for the collapse of Aksum in Ethiopia. It was an explanation for Great Zimbabwe, the shifting of the gold trade north. It has been an explanation for the Mycenaeans and the late Bronze Age collapse. All those different civilizations, like the Mycenaeans, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, they were all tied together through trade. Once one started to collapse, it impacted the economy of the others. Some people have also proposed it for the Khmer civilization as well. Another thing you probably have noticed is that droughts or flood have been used as an explanation for many different civilizations. That is a natural climate change. Aksum, it was proposed. Old Kingdom Egypt. This is one of the major factors to explain the collapse of Old Kingdom Egypt. The Maya, Harappa, the Mycenaeans, and the other peoples of the late Bronze Age, natural climate change. Angkor, flooding and also drought. And Cahokia, different periods of flooding and drought may have spelled the end of Cahokia. So droughts or floods are a fairly common explanation that is used to explain the collapse of different civilizations. Another common explanation, this is one that you probably remember, but Teotihuacan, deforestation or overuse of the land, or environmental issues caused by the people themselves. And this is one that is a popular explanation for the collapse of the classic period Maya, that they not just overused the land, but deforested a lot of areas to expand their agriculture, which led to erosion of topsoil and also probably worsened droughts as well. Cahokia, this has been another explanation for the collapse of Cahokia, and also Rapa Nui. There's a lot of debate about this, but this is one explanation that's been proposed, that the people cut down the trees. We'll talk about another explanation for that you heard about during the presentation as well. And then there are what I like to think of, there are very common explanations like droughts and floods. And then there are sort of unique explanations that are really specific to one civilization or a few civilizations, right? That maybe you heard an explanation that during one of the presentations that you didn't hear applied to any of the other civilizations. I'll talk about a couple of these. One was Old Kingdom Egypt with political decentralization, right? So not only did a natural drought probably spell a lot of problems, but also during the reign of a pharaoh who lived a long time and ruled a long time, Pepi II, these lower level bureaucrats, governors, nobility called nomarchs started to acquire more and more power. As they acquired more power in the central authority, that is of the pharaoh, decreased. And so it was a slow erosion of power at the top, an increase in power among those middle and lower levels. And that was probably a factor in the ultimate collapse of the centralized state. One theory that's been proposed to explain the collapse of Angkor Wat and the Khmer Empire, some people believe this was not really a factor, but I point it out because it's something that I don't see applied to some of these other civilizations, it seems to be kind of a unique explanation to Angkor, and that is the switch in religions from Hinduism to Buddhism. The idea is that because Hindu temples were central to the authority of the kings, and there were Hindu temples at Angkor, once most of the population were no longer Hindu, the power of the kings eroded because there was no longer that ideological basis of power anymore. And I find that to be an interesting explanation. Another explanation for Cahokia, besides flooding, drought, and deforestation, is potentially social conflict. Some people believe that Cahokia grew fairly large very quickly from different groups of people moving to Cahokia to settle there. And there is some archaeological evidence that there was divisions between these people, tension, that eventually led to social conflict, and that may have also been one of the factors that led to the collapse of Cahokia. Rapa Nui, one of the interesting explanations, deals with rats, and so this explanation holds that it wasn't the people who cut down the trees and deforested the area, it was the rats that they brought with them initially that ate the seeds of the trees, so these trees could never grow back once they were cut down. And they actually found seed pods that they believe have rat gnaw marks on them. And you heard a little bit of some of that explanation with Rapa Nui. So an invasive species. You also heard about disease as an explanation for some of the collapse of some of these civilizations. Another sort of one that I feel is kind of specific to the Maya is internal warfare. During the collapse of the Maya, during the classic period, you have a lot of war between different city-states. And there's good archaeological evidence for the suddenness of this warfare. One site, you can see there's a site called Dos Pilas. It was a well-built city. During its collapse, the people feared an invasion from another city, and they were so desperate they took apart their temples and they built walls around the central part of their temples, but they were still conquered anyway. Right? Outside invasion is another popular theory. Usually it's one that was more popular earlier on, like in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and is a little less popular today because people find it too simplistic. For example, with the Indus and the Harappan civilization, archaeologists in the 40s proposed that the invasion of Indo-Aryan peoples into South Asia spelled the end of the Harappan civilization. Now we know that this is discounted because the timing of the movement of these Indo-Aryan peoples is later than the collapse of Harappa. So in fact, Harappa collapsed first, and then these people migrated in. And a lot of people believe that they were able to migrate in because Harappa had already collapsed, or the Indus civilization had already collapsed. So it's no longer an accepted theory. With the late Bronze Age, the invasion of peoples is sometimes still talked about, but not many people believe it was a main factor. It could have been, but a lot of people think there are other things going on. Right? We learned about the late Bronze Age when we talked about the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, and this was a time period of international trade all over the Mediterranean. But at the end of the late Bronze Age, many cities along the coast of Canaan were destroyed. Mycenae was destroyed. Other Mycenaean cities were destroyed. And Egypt was invaded. And Egypt was invaded by a group of people that they referred to as the Sea Peoples. These are people from somewhere in the Aegean. And some people believe that the movement of these Sea Peoples might have been a factor in the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization. But there's debate about that, and it's not completely clear because some of the cities that were destroyed could have been destroyed by the people themselves during, basically as a period of social upheaval. Okay, well, I hope you learned something from the course. I hope you guys have a good finals week and a good summer. To those who are graduating, congratulations. And to those of you who are returning in the fall, maybe I'll see you around campus. Please, stop by and say hello, and good luck with everything coming up. Thank you.